This week, I was able to speak with Laurel Fair of Distribute Consulting, who's been working remotely for 14 years. She is a thought leader in the remote workspace, and we talked about how remote work is saving lives, how it's changing communities, how it's changing businesses, and we got personal, why she hates the sun, which is unbelievable to me as I live here in Mexico, and that's all we have is sun. But we had just this great conversation about the personal dynamics of creating a good remote workspace, about how to get a remote job, about different companies that are in different industries that are now going remote. And this conversation was awesome. Lots of laughs, lots of fun. You will enjoy it. So have fun watching this interview with Laurel Fair of Distribute Consulting. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Remote Weekly Spotlight, the show that gives you a weekly inside look at the people who make successful remote companies and how to get a job at one. I'm here with none other than Laurel Fair, who is the CEO of Distribute Consulting, the founder of the Remote Work Association, and someone who probably saw a lot of things that she did not like in that intro, including sun. And here, Laurel, as someone who, and I always the hard-hitting, most important questions first, but as someone who lives in Mexico, someone who chases the sun around the world, someone who saw a tweet of yours and thought this is complete blasphemy, where you said you hate summer. I say, what is your beef with the sun?
Look at me. I'm not like this gorgeous tanned being. Like, I'm translucent. And so, like, the sun and I are enemies. Like, I can't go outside and enjoy the sun without just getting burned and getting sweaty. And I'm like, this is the worst. So I'm that person on the beach that's like covered from head to toe, just trying to read my book and just hating every second. And so, yeah, I choose to live in a colder climate. And I'm very satisfied with my choice.
Yeah, and it's so funny because I hear a lot of people who leverage the remote work lifestyle to chase the sun, to go to places where there's warmer tropical climate. And I think it's an awesome anecdote of the opposite, right? Where remote work is really about what it enables you to do for your preferences. So I think that that's awesome that you have, you know what you like and you know what you're comfortable in. So it's always been like that for you. There's never been a time where you're like, oh, I enjoyed the beach today or the ocean.
No. I mean, if I have a good book, then I enjoy the time at the beach,
Gotcha.
but not the beach itself.
Gotcha. Okay.
Sand and yeah. We need balance in all things. I figure everybody else is at the beach. I'll take the mountain.
Perfect. And you also, as far as your remote lifestyle and like what you enjoy, I think you had said in one of your posts that you had a treadmill desk. Is that true?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Love that thing.
How many miles you put on that bad boy?
Oh, I cannot even, I have no idea. I go through ebbs and flows depending on the type of work that I'm doing, but especially when I'm doing a lot of writing, like deep headspace, it helps me focus because my body's moving and so my brain focuses better and it's just in a quiet environment. I've got that white noise of the treadmill desk and I'm not like running or jogging. I'm just
Right.
very slowly. Yep, exactly. And so I'll do that for a few hours a day and it's great.
And so everybody who's watching, I'd love to hear in the comments, where's your ideal spot to work in the house? Is it on a treadmill desk? Is it at a desk near a window, or kind of what are those ideal places for you? For me, what was interesting, I lived in Portland, Oregon for about 3 years, and I had this amazing view of the waterfront and like the Willamette River, and I had one of those bike desks, so I could just kind of slowly, move those. But I found that a lot of times I'd get really uncomfortable because sitting on a bike all day it's
you get the bruises.
It's unforgiving. It is absolutely unforgiving.
It's pretty brutal.
No matter how much cushion you put on that thing, it's not great. So I'd have to switch between that and a standing desk. And here I have kind of a sitting desk situation, but I need to maybe get some cardboard or something.
I think
Um,
it's good to move around though too. Like I
yeah.
like do like the deep headspace writing work, strategic planning. I like doing that on the treadmill. And then
Hmm.
here is like more engaging and it's, more fun. I can stand and sit and like be better at conversations. And then I find that like doing design work down in my kitchen, I can tend to like get in the flow better with creative work. So yeah, I think it's good to like switch it up a little bit, even if you're staying in your
Mm,
house, because it helps your mind kind of change
yeah.
pace and not be so stagnant, staying in the same spot all day, every day.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Is that kind of an intuitive thing for you after you've just been somewhere for a while? Or do you literally have blocks where it's like, I'm doing this creative type work, I'm going to go here?
Sometimes it changes. Sometimes it's like, yeah, I'm going to do this type of work here, but sometimes it's like, I need a change of pace in order to get into a different headspace. And so where does it sound fun to be? And if it's like a beautiful
Hmm.
day outside, I'll go and, stay close to the house so I still have a good connection, but sit in the lawn chair with while my kids are playing, or I don't
Mm.
know, be with my dog, or I don't know, like just kind of says like, where do I want to be for this type of task, and leveraging my location in order to fuel the psychology of wherever my brain needs to be.
Love that. And that's it's almost like you can use the association of the place that you're at to get to some of that creative work because as a creative, and I know you're a big time writer, like when you're trying to write, sometimes it's just like it's so hard to
Yeah, you
do.
can for sure.
So sometimes just switching so that you can your brain can associate like that switch and then going to that place with now it's time to write. You can maybe get yourself psychologically to like get in that zone. So I always think it's fascinating how different people make that work for them.
Yeah. I think everybody has to have those like bust your blocks. Like it's inevitable that you're going to feel mentally blocked at some point, but you don't have coworkers around you to be like
Hmm.
to help snap you out of it. So you're up it's up to you. Like you got to figure that out on your own about how to,
Yeah.
like, do you go for a walk? Do you take a shower? Do you do push-ups? Like what do you do to reset your headspace?
Yeah. And Clark here has a table next to the window, works on the deck. Again, the sun. He's just trying to
Mild
make you
sun,
jealous.
like under 70 degrees.
Yeah.
I'm set. I'm good.
Toss an umbrella over you, long sleeve shirt. Um, yeah, and I get burned a lot too, but I don't know. There's something about the vitamin D that just makes me feel good. So do you have like have you ever seen those like lamps on the desk that are like natural light emitters? Have you ever had to use one of those or ever thought about using one of those?
No, I do love natural light. So all of
Mm,
my home has tons of big windows. Like we constructed it to be like that because we really, really like natural light. So indirectly, I'm getting tons of sunlight. It's just directly when the sun and I meet, we tend to fight.
mm,
Like I'm still peeling right now from just working in the garden for like a couple of
yeah,
hours last weekend. I'm like,
yeah,
great.
yeah. Cool. Well, I know that we are getting into a bunch of stuff of like huge substance with remote work, but I had to ask you. It's a joke. And I had to ask you if you are not much into the sun, what would be your favorite tropical fruit?
I love mangoes.
Okay, we're friends
Yeah,
still. We're
yeah,
friends still.
mangoes. Like nothing beats just a fresh tropical when you're there. Not like
Yeah,
transported to New England, right? Like you're there in those tropical climates. Like, oh man, I just go crazy. Yeah, mangoes are awesome to
I
me.
think mangoes are the proof that God exists.
Right? Like,
Like legit.
yeah.
And here in Mexico, just unbelievable. I literally had one probably 30 minutes ago. It's either that, so I have one of those every day, or a dragon fruit. Have you ever had dragon fruit?
Absolutely. I
Mm,
had the injustice of not thinking that I liked mango as I was growing up. I worked in a smoothie shop in high school, and so the mango there was like hard, unripe, frozen mango. And so I'd have those smoothies and I'd be like, oh, like, why does everyone like mango? It's not very good. And then I had a fresh mango for the first time a few years later, and I was like, okay, we're good. Do I eat mango skin? No, I
Ma-
don't. What do you
man,
do? Do you?
Mario, what are you talking about, man? Is that good for you? I know you can
I
eat kiwis. I didn't know
Yeah.
you could eat mangoes. Well,
Oh,
you
kiwi's even worse. I would much rather eat a mango skin
really?
over a kiwi
Okay,
skin. The kiwi's got the fuzz.
right.
Sure.
It's really nutritious though. It's probably actually the same for mango. but I
Yeah.
find it to be very rough. It's like it's hard for me to like
Yeah.
chew. But Mario's
I
a
can see putting it
different
in
kind of
stuff.
cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mario's an interesting guy though. I'm sure he's
He's living on the
probably
edge.
he's eating all sorts of things. So Mario, what's the craziest thing you've ever eaten, man? I'm sure we could probably get crazier than mango skins. But to talk a little bit about remote work, because that's I did promise some people we would talk about that. Tell me about these non-technical remote industries, and with the preface, I talk to a lot of people who, one, aren't technical themselves. They haven't really worked. I'll give you an example. I'm talking to a couple people I'm working with that are actors, and they're like, how do I get into the remote workspace and like transition my experience? And tech is really hard for some people, and there's a difference between being technical and being tech savvy, right? So these are tech savvy people, but they haven't ever worked in tech. So tell me a little bit more about these non-technical remote industries that you see are popping up and expanding, and what's your experience with that?
Yeah. Well, this is something that I feel really strongly about because this is where I come from is I'm non-tech.
Mm,
So I've been a remote worker for 14 years and I was always in the services industry. So I was in corporate event planning and interior design so it's still absolutely possible to have the benefits of workplace flexibility outside of tech. It's just been incubated in the tech industry, and so that's why we hear of it more often in those in terms of those companies, right? It was just really friendly to the workflows and processes of SaaS, and so it was able to really boom in that sector much faster than it did in the other industries. But in
mm,
other industries, like for example for events, that's what got us into distribution in the first place was because we were coming up on a critical stage of growth that we needed to get the bigger office, but we were in events. And so we were coming up on the high season, which seems completely ridiculous to have an office space during that time because you're always at the event sites. You're never at the office. And so that's when we were like, well, it kind of seems like a waste of money for the next few months. Let's just, not have an office. And then we never went back because we saw all of the
mm.
benefits of it. So it's really important to think about this in terms of like, how can this benefit our company? And that's when we see like plumbers and construction workers and auto mechanics and, graphic designers and actors. Like, just think about it in terms of tasks, like which tasks do you need to
Yeah.
be doing in a specific location. So for example, like an actor, yeah, you definitely want to be on a stage in front of an audience when you are performing, unless you're doing recorded work. So that is pretty location dependent. However, there's plenty of administrative work and prep work that all goes into that single moment that you can be anywhere. It's completely location irrelevant. So that's what we're moving forward into in the future of work is like this hybridization of like, yeah, there's certain tasks that need to be on site, but most of it doesn't need to be in a certain location because just so much of how we operate business in general is on a computer.
Yeah, one of the coolest, funniest examples I saw of this was the goat and llama farmers who, did you see this? Where they started like, so there's I don't know if it was like a petting zoo or it was just a farmer who had goats and llamas and whatever, but they took the idea of being able to come and pet and see their animals, and they made it virtual. They said, hey, you can have a llama on your meeting for $50 or something like that, right? And then
That's right. I did hear
yeah,
that
they
one.
zoom in the alpaca, the llama, the goat, whatever, and you pick who you want on there, and that's just part of your meeting. And it's just like this really kind of culty, funny,
Mm-hmm.
remote work. It's kind of like creating, when you create those little Slack channels that people can talk in about anything that they want. It's just one of those random things that just, it's a laugh in the day of a remote worker that is actually so important for companies to foster. Like if companies are actually serious about how the morale of their employees is doing, they have the goat come on the meeting once a week, like just a goat budget.
Yeah, everybody has a go budget, right? But I think that's critical to specifically job searching. traditional roles are mostly going to be on site. And so this process,
Hmm.
exactly like you're talking about, of like thinking outside the box of how can we make this traditional workflow or this traditional experience that was on site, how can we incorporate that into virtual? How can we change the channel on that? What does that look like in a digital virtual space?
Yeah.
The ability to think like that is what's going to make or break your success in getting a remote job, is because everything that's on the job boards is all about how has it been done in person. But we all need to be the people that are coming with that message of this is how we can update it for the future of work. This is how we can access all of the benefits of workplace flexibility in this traditional role. So if you're the candidate that's coming with a plan
Hmm.
and a suggestion
Yeah.
and a proposal, then that's going to set you that much higher.
Yeah, and you kind of have to be a pioneer in some of these things because the job boards and the listings haven't caught up yet, right? There's
Yeah.
still a lot of these industries where it's very difficult. Like, for instance, when I talked to this guy who's this actor, right? So he's telling me there's a bunch of stuff in post-production, there's a bunch of stuff in the early stage in casting,
Exactly.
all remote. But when I go online to remote job boards, like that's not the stuff that I see. So I think, for someone like that, it's really interesting to maybe go to different firms that haven't even thought about putting up jobs like this and saying, hey, here's an example of the certain things that I do, the success that I have, and here's how it applies to your company. If this is of interest to you,
Mm-hmm.
let's have a discussion, right? And I'm always a big fan of giving companies something that they can use with or without you. That's
Mm-hmm.
the true mark of value, is that there's no expectation of getting something back. So that's helped a lot of people, and I'm curious. So you're suggesting, okay, let's look at all these remote tasks. Any other ideas of, like, if I'm a job seeker, like I've got all my remote tasks that I can do within the experience realm that I have, what would be a next step that you could imagine of getting in contact or doing something?
Yeah, I mean, showing your value remotely, I think, is number one. We conducted a bunch of research on this last year about like what was blocking people from getting remote jobs, and we were conducting it on both sides, studying the side of the employer, studying the side of the job seekers, and really in communication with both. And what was going wrong more often than anything else, what were that they were not demonstrating the skills of a remote worker during the job interview process. And so, if you can prove to the employer, like, I'm going to be accessible, I'm going to be responsive, I'm going to be
Mm-hmm.
creative, I'm going to be self-starter, I'm going to be able to work autonomously, like I'm going to be able to do all these things, and I'm showing it to you right now. I'm
Yeah.
coming to the interview with ideas and proposals and questions. Like, that's what they want to see, that's what they need to see, because that's what they need to depend on you to do after you're hired. So the more that you can be already operating like a remote worker before you are employed as a remote worker, that's going to boost your
Mm-hmm.
success as well.
Yeah. 100%. And I love that the whole show me, don't tell me concept, right? Like actually give me proof and de-risk the situation. You talked a little bit about virtual work saving lives, changing socioeconomic conditions, changing businesses, communities. Now, this is obviously a very broad topic, and it's also very multi-leveled. It's complex in some ways. Would you explain the concept of what remote work means to society to a 10-year-old?
To a 10-year-old. Well, I have a 10-year-old, so this is very, very,
Perfect.
yeah, this is great. She and I don't get along very much, so maybe I'm not the best person to explain it.
We're
No,
building the
so
bridge here. This is how we're
you're
starting the conversation here.
you're making me a better parent right now. Yeah, so what we talk about, well, the conversation that we've been having a lot lately to a 10-year-old is education, right? Like, how
Mm,
is this changing your life? And so when we're talking about things like, yeah, if you go back to school, it might be this hybrid environment in which there's some people in the classroom and there's some people out of the classroom, but it's still going to be the same. Like, you guys are all still getting the same education, and you still have the same teacher, and you're still doing the same work. You're just in different places, and
mm,
so, and obviously that that magnifies into on a business continuity and economic resiliency level. It's like, look, we're all bouncing back. We're all coming back to find whatever the new or the next normal is going to be, but we're all participating just in different places. And so that's really what this zooms out to be in terms of socioeconomics of remote work. It means that we, for hundreds of years, have been taking people to work. This was the Industrial Revolution. It was the birth of centralized work. And so we've been moving the people to the equipment. But now the equipment isn't as, cumbersome and physical and manual. And so now we have this flexibility. And we've still been operating just out of habit with that same centralized mindset. But now it's, if we take that out and allow our brains to unlock and say, wait, if we don't have to be in a certain location, what does this mean? And that's where it changes everything. It changes education, right? Geography and location isn't relevant to anything. So we don't have rich neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods. We just have education from the city. We don't have, urban and rural. We have economic health regardless of location. Like, you can be anywhere and be successfully contributing to the local economy. We have diversity and inclusion, that no matter who you are, where you are, you're capable of great results. And so you can be working for a very successful company, getting promoted as a minority that's living in the middle of nowhere. Like, environmental sustainability, the list just goes on and on and on. But when we allow our minds to really unlock and take out location as a criteria in just how our brain operates, it really opens so many new doors that will honestly change the future of how we live our personal lives, how we live the lives of our households, and even bigger, how our communities continue to thrive in the future.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then it also opens up opportunities for those people to be able to do things that they would have never been able to do before. And I talked to Darren Murph about this too on our conversation, where, it democratizes choices. And one thing I'm curious about that you said was it's giving this sense of inclusion to people that are all over the world, no matter where they are. So let me give you an example. There's a girl I'm working with that's from Bali. She's from Indonesia and she wants to travel the world. But one of the things she's running up against is, like, a lot of these companies want to pay her Indonesian wages, but she's really smart, and the only thing that holds her back is just the citizenship that she has from that. So I don't know if you have any idea, and like, how this whole remote compensation thing works, because I'm still seeing that there's this gap between, okay, like, we want to create inclusion and fairness and all these things, but the compensation is still going to be highly different. And I get if someone's living somewhere for long term, but what about for someone who maybe, hey, I want to go travel, I want to go do these things, like, I'm not making that kind of money to be able to do it.
Yeah, this is a conversation that is enormous and very, very complex, and honestly needs to be regulated with international standards. So this is a conversation that could and should be had in the realms of, the United Nations, World Economic Forum, League of Nations, etc. Because
not this podcast.
We're starting it here.
We can't solve the problem.
Yeah, because this is complicated. So in the short term, right now, employers, it differs per employer, right? Like, some employers are going to say, yeah, I'm only going to pay you local wages because that isn't what enables us to save money, and that's part of the value that you bring to the company. But then others say, we're just going to play a flat rate. Others have structures, and so it's low cost areas versus high cost areas based on locality costs. Like, there's different formulas. The point is, so that's the short term, is that there is no regulation. So in the long term, there needs to be regulation. There needs to be ethical standards that say this is the right way and this is the wrong way. And so there needs to be an approval system. There needs to be massive economic calculations on how the spending would impact various communities and how it would contribute to wealth disparity in various locations. Like, it honestly, like, if we just start paying everybody, for US salaries around the world, that could destroy some economies. So
for sure,
it needs to come into this with a lot of thought, a lot of intention, and a lot of collaboration between all of the various economists throughout the world.
So you don't have all the answers.
Not yet. We're
Not
working
with
on
that.
it.
That is a tough question. I had no idea what you would be able to say to that, and that's hence why I haven't been able to answer a question.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, oh, let me get back to you on that.
Yeah, the short answer there is
Jeez.
that it's going to be different for every employer right now. So make sure that you do your research during the job search about how that employer calculates the salary, because it is going to be very, very, very different per employer.
Yeah. So you've obviously to come to the insights that you're able to come to because of the decade plus experience you have in remote working and working with these, not only as an evangelist, but like working with companies, evangelizing it for them. You've talked a little bit about imposter syndrome, and I'm wondering if you can speak to how that's really impacted you, because I think from the outside, a lot of people would just see this really, really confident, outgoing, like strong, like I live in the winters, like, like,
Rocky.
you know, yeah, just totally like all, you know, you're all on it. So tell me a little about how imposter syndrome has impacted you and what you do to combat that.
Yeah, this is a massive conversation. And the best way that I can describe it to other people is that, 14 years ago when I started working remotely, I was, a young aspiring professional. And I was a girl on a couch with an idea, and I was feeling really excited and motivated to progress. And that's what helped me launch all of, remote work in the first place. But 14 years later, I'm still a girl on a couch with an idea, right? Like I'm just sitting there with my laptop, feeling just as motivated, just as inspired, just as ambitious, but my surroundings have not changed at all. And so I'm still me. And it's hard when you don't have all of those environmental criteria in order to remind you that you're progressing. Back when I was in corporate, it was very easy to have that recognition of like, yeah, I'm climbing the ladder quickly because I went from the cubicle to the office to the corner office within a year, like it was, and I was like, man, I'm awesome. And so I had that confidence because it was reinforced externally. But that doesn't happen in remote work. And just a couple of years ago is when I really started in interviewing other remote work leaders and saying, do you struggle with this? And all of them were like, absolutely, totally. I struggle with this so much. And so it was actually just a few weeks ago that I got on the phone with the world's leading expert, Valerie Young, who specializes in the topic of remote work, or of imposter syndrome. And I thought that I was going to be like this, innovative, bright person that was like, have you ever considered the correlation between remote work and imposter syndrome? And she was like, oh, of course. I was like, oh.
Wrote the study on it back in 1945.
Like, well, if you look at my book, I was like, oh, man. So, but she's like, grad students, remote workers, independent consultants, like anybody that spends an extended amount of time in an isolated environment is at much higher risk for these feelings of imposter syndrome. And so that's really a new personal mission of mine, is to say, within my own team. I mean, I literally have a team of experts. Like that's what we do, is we are all experts, and none of us feel like experts because we all have imposter syndrome. And so it's like, so we are working on that in our team to say, all right, how are we going to bust this in our team? But then also taking it to the rest of the industry. It's like, yeah, we're alone, but what do we need to do as individuals and as a community to feel more confident, to recognize our own progress in a more healthy way so that we don't have this career stagnancy risk.
Yeah, and one connection that I kind of made in there was, her name was Valerie, you said?
Valerie Young, yeah.
Yeah, so her kind of telling you that is very similar to one thing you had mentioned in your writing when I did my research, where you said you get mansplained a lot from like mid-20s tech founders quoting your articles.
The time.
So you got it back on that one. It sounded like Valerie got you.
Touche, Valerie. Touche.
Valerie, she's ahead of that 8 ball, man. I tell you what. we got a couple of questions here, so I'm gonna bring these up. What basis should be used in determining remote work salaries by global brands, since one of the key things that attract people from developing world to be remote workers is better pay and greater freedom? So this is kind of back to that discussion, but maybe what Fadila is wondering is if you have any opinion on what basis should be determined for that.
Yeah, so typically where it starts is just a conversation about national averages, and it's really that simple. So what is the headquarters of the company, and what are their primary markets? So where's the majority of the staff located? And then just calculating a national average or an international average of the earning potential. So, and that's a 10-second Googling of like, what is the average salary of a graphic designer? And that's usually the starting point of any formula of any distributed company.
Gotcha. And then she'd asked, with emergency of digital nomadism, how can companies ensure equal pay and benefits? I think she means emerging as digital nomadism emerges, how to ensure that. I have one comment on that as well, as I think there's disruptors in the insurance industry now that are focusing on this, which Safety Wing being one of the bigger ones that I know of. But I'm curious what you think as well.
Yeah, I think it's first important to note that the remote work industry of products and services specifically for remote workers is also still emerging. And so, and especially the entire industry has fast forwarded 10 years in 2 weeks. And so there's a lot of people now that are like, why doesn't this exist? And why doesn't this exist? Like, obviously there's a demand for it. And it's like, yeah, but there wasn't 6 months ago. We were still knocking on doors and saying, please listen to us 6 months ago. And now the entire world wants us. So we have to remember these products and services are coming. But in the meantime, it's going to be a very manual process of whether you're talking about internal ops tools or benefits and pays, like how do we standardize? And there are some startups out there that do cater to this, but in the meantime, it might just be a pretty like complicated conversation with you and your insurance provider of like, well, we've got some people that are out, and some people that are in, and what can we do? So it is going to be a pretty manual process for a little while.
And just a quick plug, Safety Wing, who I am partnered with, does offer the team remote team insurance. So that's something that I think we'll also see other disruptors start to come in and create products like this, where it's really meant for people that are traveling or have people on their teams that are traveling. And that goes to kind of speak of like this whole industry. Like you said, it's accelerated so fast. I'm curious if you look back on your 14 years, on what you've seen over the time, on what you see as the future, like what has been your biggest contribution to the remote work world personally?
Personally, wow, that's a massive question. Well, I mean, this makes me sound absolutely ancient, but 14 years ago, we didn't even have video calls. We didn't have cloud collaboration. Like, there was nothing. So, like, it's come a long, long way in 14 years. I would like to think that my personal contribution is expanding the voice of remote work. That's really been what I've been focused on for the past few years, is because I came from outside of tech. When I got into tech, I was like, you guys have so much information to share with the world. Like, we gotta get this out. So that's, I hope, the legacy that I'm leaving is like, let's expand. Let's take remote to work as many industries as possible and as many people as possible. I want to really distribute work in the fact that it distributes opportunity, it distributes accessibility. Like, that's what I want to make sure that the world has because of me, is the opportunity to work remotely if they choose to.
Yeah, and if I can make a comment on that, on what I think some of your greatest contributions are, just from looking online, I saw on your site and through various different places that you've posted, I mean, hundreds of articles, no short of hundreds. And obviously, I think we both know Darren. I mean,
he's great.
That guy's like, I don't know what his deal is with thousands and thousands of articles, but but yours are just, I mean, they're so rich. They're the first one that I had. I think the first one that I read randomly that was recommended to me was the is remote work illegal, which is pretty recent. But then I went on, kind of a, I don't know, the wormhole or whatever to start to look at all these articles that you've written. And that to me is that part for you, is that voice, right? So it seems like you might have some of this imposter syndrome that's come up, but yet at the same time, it's like you've got these articles that really show your expertise. And I think it's ironic sometimes when we get in that zone where we don't think we're contributing as much, or we don't think we have that expertise yet. Other people like myself, I see you as just like this god of writing these articles and spreading that information. So I'm curious. You're welcome. And I'm curious, along the lines of your writing, when did you know that you were a writer?
Well, I've always been a reader. And I think that that's the first, the baby step. You have to crawl before you walk. And I was just raised in a very literary household. And I remember actually a teacher in it was like 7th or 8th grade. I submitted a paper and she was like, no, like, look me in the eyes, you're good. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
okay. Like, so she kind of helped me recognize that that was a talent. I never ever thought that I would do anything with it professionally. I never like had the aspirations to be an author or writer, but it did become a very good way to articulate. And so I wasn't ever considering myself to be a writer until it was when I became more of a consultant that people were asking me questions like, well, how do you do this? And so in the process of figuring out how to explain it to them, I had to write it down, because in remote work, it's asynchronous communication. So I'd have to like think about it, put it into words, and then send that over. And so it was a very organic transformation of explaining to people through the written word about how remote work works. And then I just fell into some really great opportunities with books and with Forbes, and they saw something in my writing. They were like, oh yeah, you're good. And so I still don't consider myself to be a writer, but I do enjoy explaining the topics that I feel passionate about through articles. It's a nice succinct way to say, here's the information that you're looking for on this topic without having to verbally explain it over and over.
Yeah. So what's your process? You're going to write an article tomorrow. What do you do?
Well, I'm a content nerd, an organizational nerd, so I always have this big mind map of like things that I'm thinking about and topics that I think are going to match the news cycle, and things that I think that people should know. And so I have a bunch of articles that are like that, of like, nobody's going to think that this is interesting, but I think that people need to know it, and so I'm just going to publish it just because. I always have the mind map, and then I go into the topic and say, okay, like, which ones are jumping out to me this month, and then I write an outline of takeaways. What do I want the world to know? I'm a very listicle person. I like bullet points information. I like it to be very actionable. So that's where I start, is like, what's the list that I want to include, and then I flesh it out, and then I publish.
Where's that mind map? Like, what application do you use?
It's usually just a Google Doc. Sometimes Cool. I'll just use a whiteboard and then transfer it into a Google Doc. But Google Docs and the sun and I are are enemies.
A lot further apart. Yeah.
Google Docs and I are pretty tight.
I'm such a nerd for this stuff too, like the process of all this, because I'm a writer as well, and I put out articles, and I for a long time didn't think I was a writer, but then I got that first check from Medium. I did their partner program, and it was 30 cents, and I was like, I'm a writer.
Nailed it.
I get paid to put my words down. And it seems so trivial, but a 31-cent paycheck, I think it was. It gave me I posted on my Instagram story. I was like, look at this. Like, I wrote this article like months ago, and now I'm getting paid. I'm not even doing anything. And I was like, wow, this.
I did have that same moment with speaking. That was a big one. I was actually, I was sitting on a bus, and it was, it was a shuttle from the airport to the hotel, and I was on a bus with a bunch of mansplainer type businessmen. So I'm just sitting in the back. They're totally ignoring me, um, and I overheard them talking about the conference and how they were all like trying to one up themselves about the conference. And I could kind of been like thinking about it in on the plane, like, wow, this is like somebody's paying for me to fly to a place just to talk
Mm,
for like, huh? Like it kind of had like been prepping my brain for it. And then when I heard them talking about the conference, and then I realized that I was the keynote at the conference that they were all trying to ruffle their feathers about. I was like,
mm,
huh. Like I think I'm onto something here. Like I think I'm actually a business speaker. Like
yeah.
and which is ridiculous because obviously like I had plenty of experience getting to that point, but it was in that, that imposter syndrome busting moment of like, oh, this is happening. This is me now. Like this is part of my career. Like, wow, that's exciting. So yeah, I relate to you. I had that same moment of like, this is for real. Let's do this.
Yeah. So what was the connection there? So they were talking about the conference, but then what was it for you that made that connection that like, oh man, like was it the fact that you're going on in front of them and that they're paying for the
Yeah.
conference, or like how did that
Yeah, I think the thought that went through my mind was like, they are ignoring me in the bus because they think that I'm just, some young
some
girl
random
that's
yeah.
right, like traveling with dad's credit card or something, right? But then when I saw them and I heard them talking about the conference, I was like, I advise your boss's boss's boss. Like,
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
okay, like I can walk out of the shuttle with a little bit more confidence in my step. Like, okay, yeah, I've done something with my career. Yes, I'm still that girl on the couch, but I've got some great ideas. I've got a great message to
Hmm.
share, and there are people that see value in that.
Did you ever have a situation where one of those types of things happen and then they saw you like walk up on stage and they're like, you said a demeanor change?
Yeah, I did see them the next day at the conference, and they didn't recognize me because I mean I was very ignorable in the bus.
Mm,
So I saw them, they didn't see me, so I did see them the next day, and it was a satisfying moment.
that's fun. It's always fun to like have those kind of like underdog moments where you're like, wow, like I'm doing better than I thought I would be doing, or like I don't know, it's just
Yeah,
it's
and I think
validating.
it is. It's important for us to stay humble and to stay teachable, right? So that we're always pushing ourselves, we're always growing, but we do need to find that balance of having the confidence, patting ourselves on the back, especially as remote workers, that we don't have people around us to do that. Like nobody's passing by and saying like,
Hmm.
"Hey, I saw that report. Like, good job." Like nobody's there
Yeah.
to do that for us. And so we do need to be able to do that for ourselves and recognize our own achievements, but then also not get caught up in ourselves either and be like, I'm awesome, because I see that all the time. And we're seeing that a ton right now with remote work experts, right? Like I'm an expert. And it's like, no, you've been working remotely for 4 months. Like you're not an
Yeah.
expert. You have some experience and you have a lot of enthusiasm, but you're not an expert. So yeah, I think finding the balance between having confidence, being proud, recognizing our achievements, but then also recognizing we still have a long way to go, being receptive to mentorship and coaching, I think is a really important balance that everybody needs to have in their career regardless of location.
Hmm. Speaking of balance, work life, you've talked in some writing that I saw that was about enforcing strict time blocking for yourself, making sure that you clearly articulated KPIs for your work-life balance. What are those KPIs?
Yeah, so work-life balance is something that I struggle with every single day. A lot of people don't. This isn't it is a common problem for remote workers, but not inevitable. I happen to be on the side of the fence that I love what I do and I love
Mm,
working. And so for me, it's very easy to just like, oh, 5 more minutes and
same.
right? It's tough. So yeah, so for those, for me, KPIs need to be very, very specific and be very, very diversified, because in my work, I don't know what the week is going to bring. So my KPIs can't be like, I'm going to produce X number of articles and speak at X number of events and have X number of meetings. Like, it's never going to pan out that way. Some weeks are completely different, and some are completely the same. So for me, and actually in my team, we each have a question that we ask ourselves at the end of the week, that kind of is an overarching, if I can ask myself this question and say yes, then it's been a good week. And so for me, that question is about supporting my executive team. Like, do they have what they need, and have they been able to progress? Have they been able to fulfill their objectives this week? And that keeps me centered on my highest priority is my executives, and I need to make sure that they're always supported. And then same thing, like my operations manager is like, is our structure stronger this week? And other, like, part of the strategy team is, do more people know about distribute consulting and stuff like that. So yeah, the KPIs, I do think it's important to have like as much structure as possible, but also to give yourself some flexibility of like, no matter what happens, I can still be satisfied. Productivity has a lot of different labels, a lot of different definitions. So make sure that you can measure productivity in, I didn't think that I didn't do what I thought that I was going to do, but I was still productive because I did this, this, and this, and this. Like, results don't have to be deliverables. So what did I do this week that I can feel proud of and that moved me higher and made more progress in the objectives of my role?
It's very interesting because it seems so counterintuitive from what most people do. Because most people will set those metrics as like the be all end all, right? And I think that that's an interesting thing to think about, because I mean, for myself included, like, I look at, how many of these posts did I get done, and how many, I get very granular on that, and I just get kind of burnt out on that sometimes, where I'm like, can I even, is it even worth doing this? Should I do it? Or am I just doing these arbitrary things? And how do I measure the success of those? And yeah, I think it's a valid thing to do, is have questions in place, I think, that really challenge the effort rather than the output, because sometimes we can't always control the output.
Exactly. Like those KPIs, I mean, don't get me wrong, we still have those KPIs that are very quantitative, and that's a best case scenario. But we're also consultants, and we're consulting on an emerging industry, and so we have to have flexibility. So yeah, that overarching question really helps us still feel that satisfaction that we need of, I was productive, I was successful, because only when you get to that point of that sense of fulfillment can you unplug. And so if you don't have that sense of fulfillment, if you're only looking at those KPIs and thinking, I didn't get any of those done this week because I was so busy with other things, you're never going to be able to unplug and balance the life side of your work. And so you have to have that point that you can feel that satisfaction and have that like release of dopamine that's like, yes, I was productive this week. I'm satisfied, I'm fulfilled, I'm going to unplug and then go enjoy and be present in the other side of the balance. If you can't achieve that sense of fulfillment, then your work-life balance is screwed. So you've really got to be able to figure out, like, how am I measuring success in work? How am I measuring success in life in order to keep that balance?
Yeah, and it just becomes impossible to be present in the other side. So I've definitely been there.
And asking yourself the same question for life too, I have to say. Like, as a working mom, that's a really hard struggle to, like, sorry kids, you need to go away right now because I've got to have a meeting. Like, there's a whole lot of guilt that can come from that. So if I have a similar question at the end of the day, that's like, okay, do my kids know that I love them? Do they feel that I love them? And so, like, yeah, I can turn them away for a meeting and they can still know that I love them. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, you got to have that overarching question for both sides of work and life.
Yeah, and making sure that you're not making things mutually exclusive that aren't, right?
Hmm.
And if you want better results and better answers for your life's questions, you got to ask better questions. So I think
Yeah.
that's tremendous. You are a self-proclaimed introvert. You felt it sounded like a sense of guilt that you had some peace when there was a global lockdown.
Yeah.
But now that things are coming back, you maybe had a little anxiety of that. I want to tie this into another thing that you talked about, which is digital networking. So as
Mm.
an introvert, tell me about some of the ways that you've been able to create a methodology for networking with other people.
Hmm. Yeah, well, virtual networking was actually one of the ways in which I felt more comfortable networking. So my husband is in business development, and so he is definitely that person that can walk into an expo and just work the room and come out with tons of leads. And that is not going to happen. Like I get so much anxiety in big groups and just talking to people and initiating conversations over and over. Like
Mhm.
that is my nightmare. So that's not going to happen. So, and also social media really burns me out as well. And I know that a lot of people do great networking on social media. And so that was when I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, I
Yeah.
have to build this network. I'm alone in my home office all day, especially when I turned into an independent consultant and I didn't have coworkers. And I was like,
Hmm.
I've got to crack the nut on this, but I just don't know how. So I really evaluated like, what do I feel comfortable doing? How am I? What is safe for me and how can I lean into that? And so I'm a very service oriented person. And so if you go way back into my Twitter archives, like that's how it started, was just giving people advice. I would create what I called remote tips. And it was like, this is what I think you should be doing. Like, here's a tiny little piece of advice. And so I was never like reaching out to people and, plus wanting and like doing all of the strategies. I was just giving people information. And actually that's been the basis of all of my networking as it's evolved and turned into, is like, what can I give people? And that's what I do as a writer. It's like, I'm going to give them information and then people come to me, and it's much safer that way, because I'll talk
Yeah,
to
yeah.
you all day long, but initiating a conversation is very hard and very scary. So yeah, so it's about I think it's a strategy of like finding what is safe and how can I lean into that as a strategy. So anytime I have to go to a cocktail party, which is literally like I have nightmares about cocktail party. Like I
Mm.
hate them. And so but I'm like, okay, what is it about a cocktail party that's scary? It's initiating those conversations.
Right.
It's not knowing anybody. So if I go with somebody that I know, then it's not scary and it's fine.
Yeah.
And so before a cocktail party, I'll just make sure that I know somebody else that's going to be there, and I'll say, hey, do you want to go together? Like, I'll give you a ride or whatever. And then it's much easier for me. So yeah, I think it's about just finding the root of the problem, like what is it that's hard about this, and then what is it that is safe for me, and how can I bridge the gap between the two? Because everybody's a different kind of introvert, everybody's a different kind of
Mhm.
extrovert, and so you just got to find your unique strategy.
Have you ever done comedy before?
No.
It's weird, but I feel like you actually could be good at comedy. One of the interesting parts of
Career
comedians,
goal.
there's a lot of comedians who are very introverted, and like
Ah,
that's the way that they communicate with people, is that they don't feel the pressure of having to initiate the conversation. They're just talking at people, and the people
yeah,
react how they react.
yeah,
But you're also pulling towards you, what we call like a pull technique, is put content out there, put your voice out there, and whoever comes towards you, those are going to be the kind of people you're going to want to talk to anyway, and you don't
exactly.
have that pressure, right? So I just thought there was kind of a tie there, because Comedy is really not about being funny as much as it's about just being interesting. Um,
Right. And relevant.
and yeah, and if you could be quick, like even better. I did about a year of improv and then did some stand up as well. Most terrifying thing of my life,
Oh, for sure.
but I can see that like introverted like haven where it's like I'm up on stage and I'm talking at people and then they're coming towards me.
I think, yeah, I think that's why I do so much public speaking is like I can
Mm-hmm.
talk at people all day long.
Yep.
And I'm very animated and I'm very, like, I totally feel in my element on the stage. Because there's nobody around me. It's talking
Yeah.
with people that I'm like, hi, like I'm not interesting. Yeah, like and that's imposter syndrome, and yeah, like it's a very deep and complicated thing that I feel like I should be on a therapist sofa right now having this conversation. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, like talking at people for sure and giving people information. So even now when I outreach to people on LinkedIn, then it's like I give them a compliment because that feels comfortable for me.
Yeah.
Like that's that who doesn't want a compliment? Like I'm not going to be bothering anybody if I give them a compliment. So that's how I introduce myself to somebody, and then they start the conversation. Then it's easy from there. Easier.
Yeah. And I'll because of the time that we have left, I'll make sure to also link the article that you were in on Workplace Lists because you had talked specifically about different types of people. So having a sounding board, having a mentor, having a double checker, a techie, your competition, your enforcer. And I thought that article was just like really good at breaking down those different types of people. One person you missed would be your romantic partner. And I know you've also talked in some of your stuff about having work from home romance. So I think
Yes.
this is important because I don't know if my girlfriend, yeah, she's here because her shoes are at the door, so she's in the other room. But yeah, when you work from home and your significant other works from home, tell me a little bit more about what was maybe the most inspirational or interesting thing you took out of that Twitter thread that you started, or even what you do that you find that really helps build romance in relationships that are at home.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of togetherness, right? And so that can be a bad thing, it can be a good thing. My husband and I have that relationship that we make everybody else sick. Like we just love being together. Like we can't get
Mm,
enough each other, and we don't get tired. And so for us, it's very easy, and it's even like a little bit difficult when we do have to work in separate offices because we're both on phone calls all day and video calls, and so it's like we can't interrupt each other's audio. And so that's one strategy, I think. But I think, well, but then we were also laughing about this with our next door neighbors because they're also a work from home couple, and they have to separate all day every day, or
yeah,
else like that marriage is not going to continue. So I think it's just like figure out what works for you. I mean, this is kind of the same answer as the introversion and virtual networking. It's like, okay, well, what works for you guys, and just communicate about it.
yeah,
And what do you need? And just, I mean, that's kind of the theme of remote work in general is the value of communication, right? In remote work, there's no such thing as over communication, and so the same is true for your partner. Like don't, instead of just getting frustrated about everything, like I can hear you chewing, like just talk
yeah.
to each other about it. Take those skills that make you successful in your remote team, and then just talk to your partner. And then yeah, just keeping the love alive is like finding what you guys do enjoy doing, and turning it into something great. And yeah, like I think it's super funny. One person even commented in there like, "Yeah, we totally have a nooner." I'm like, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Like take advantage of work from home, right? Like it's and some people it's not taking a break together. I know that my husband, because I struggle unplugging at the end of the day, he's like, "Okay, we're gonna go for a walk together," and he helps and supports me in that work-life balance. So yeah,
Mm,
it's about like, what do you need? Where do you need me to be? How can I express my appreciation to you? How can I support you? Because you do need to play that role of both partner and coworker at the same time. And so it's, yeah, taking breaks through the day and being like, oh, the most frustrating thing just happened to me, and being that co-working listening ear, but then also at the end of the day, also being able to leave work behind and then
Yeah,
talk equally about the garden and your kids and your pets and a trip that you're going to take. Like, you both have to be present in the same space at the same time.
which is hard.
Yeah, really
Because you
hard.
guys could be on different states, right? Too, where it's like you're really still invested in your workday. Theirs has ended, so it's like, what, how do you find that time? So I think I love the fact that obviously that is a very subjective, the right word. Like, depending on the relationship, there has to be some
Mhm.
of those things that you communicate about. What else? I think that is. We went through a lot of stuff. I don't know how we
Yeah,
got through that many
that
subjects.
was good stuff.
Well, Laurel, I would love to share this dragon food that I'm about to cut up with
Oh,
you, but we're a little far away.
killing
My,
me.
my last question would be, if your dog Wally could talk, how would he describe you?
Wally and I are on the same wavelength. Wally is 13 years old, and he is old and placid, and so I think he and I are like, yeah, Wally and I, we're our people. We love to just sit and relax and just enjoy life. So I think Wally would be like, yeah, Laurel's my bud. We're on the same wavelength. I hope
It's my
that's what he would say.
homegirl. It's my
Yeah,
homegirl.
yeah.
Her
Everybody else
hair,
wants
her
to
hair's kind of
play.
weird. She doesn't have hair everywhere like I do, but she's cool.
We get along.
She don't bark with me, but whatever.
Yeah, we're slow, thoughtful beings, he and I.
Amazing. Well, Laurel, we're right up here on the hour. I appreciate you so much for spending this time with me. I know that you could be spending it doing a million other things, but you're out here educating more people, getting the voice of remote work out there. Any last words from you?
No, this was so fun. Thank you for asking me new questions. I love talking about remote work tools and management, and that's great. But man, it's nice to talk about Wally and imposter syndrome too.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good stuff out there, and you have so much to teach. So everybody out there, what's the best place to find you? Would that be your website? Is the most?
Yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter are pretty easy access. I'm the only Laurel Farr, so it's easy to find me. And then, yeah, website is always great too.
The only one in the world, one of a kind.
For now, for
Laurel
now.
Farr, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank
Have
you,
a
Jordan.
fantastic day.
It's been a pleasure.
Woo!